Hey, this is Clayton, aka Celldweller, and I've got something really cool to show you from Joey Sturgis Tones. It's called Subdestroyer. Let's take a look. So at first look, Subdestroyer is a very simple plugin. Very simple GUI, very small footprint, which is kind of cool. And when Joey had described this to me, he just basically said, yeah, it's gonna do sub drops, which is great because I have made a lot of my own sub drops manually and they take a long time to make. Getting a plugin to do that automatically for me would save me tons of time. So I actually built a little track, which I'll show you a little bit later, comprised of like 6 instances of Subdestroyer, and that's all that's in it, besides some drums from my Sonics sample pack and some effects. That's it. So if we look at the GUI, it's pretty, for the most part, self-explanatory. You've got, if you input MIDI into the plugin like you would any other VST, you play a keyboard, you're playing notes, and you've got basic sine wave, triangle wave, a square wave, and a saw wave. You change your waveforms there. There's a limiter built in, which is really handy to have. And then on the first tab down here, under Automate, you've got a hold button. And when you press this button, whatever frequency you have dialed in with this knob is what it's going to play back. And I kind of use that functionality in the track, and I'll show you how I did in a few minutes. This is the cool part right here that I'm excited about. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is going to save me hours. It's called the trigger tab, and when you hit this fancy little fire button, it fires off a sub drop. And if you select a triangle or a square or a saw. What's even cooler about that, let's go back to the square because it's got lots of harmonic content so you can hear it really easily, is you have this length knob here. So if I want a much longer drop, I crank that up, fire, and there you go, a nice long sub drop. What's cool here is you've got a start frequency and an end frequency, so I can tell Subdestroyer that I'm in this key and I want to start on this particular frequency and drop down to this frequency, which could be in the key of my song if I really cared that much to do it. But it's really handy that you can kind of dial in a starting and ending frequency as well. Here in the MIDI tab, you have kind of MIDI-based parameters that you can turn on or off and tweak. So right now, by default, it's monophonic. So you can only play one note at a time, no matter how many you slam how many of your fingers you slam on your keyboard. But if you put in the polyphonic mode, you now have polyphony, so I can play multiple notes. Which is cool because you can use this like a synth. You've got pitch bend and mount, which is really cool. Portamento, which I love, and it's so great to see that even in a plugin like this, you've got the ability to... So you've got a very concise start between each note I hit. If I'm jumping an octave, what portamento is, if you don't know, basically allows you to slide between those notes back and forth by varying amounts. So a little bit of portamento sounds like this, and a lot of portamento. And no portamento. And then your output has a VU meter, so you can kind of see the level kind of coming out of Subdestroyer. A couple of cool features here. You've got a drive section here, which actually adds a little bit of overdrive to your tone. What's cool about that, you have like a square wave here, and you turn it on, you hear virtually nothing because there's so much harmonic content already in a square wave naturally. But when you go down to something like a sine wave, if I turn that off, there's a very low sine wave tone, so a D. If I turn this on and turn the drive up, you've got an overdriven sine wave, which is really nice. Now you've got this character, this smaller button. What's interesting for me, you've got different settings, but if you were to automate this with a sine wave through distortion, it kind of, and I don't know if this was intentional, but it kind of emulates a square wave in a vintage analog synthesizer, and there's something called pulse width, and you can modulate the pulse width, which takes a square wave, and you've got a high value and a low value, and it basically moves the high value back and forth, and what it does is it creates movement in the waveform and makes one single oscillator sound much bigger than it really is, thicker. And this in a certain way emulates that. which is pretty handy. And now another thing that's really cool, Joey showed this to me when he's here, and it was eye-opening because I didn't really understand it at first, or I didn't really even notice it was there. So this Harmonic Enhancement button right here, you turn it on, and what it does is exactly that. It adds overtones to your frequency that will allow, let's say, a sine wave, which usually, by nature, the lower you get, the harder it is for the human ear to hear it. You engage that button, and it starts adding overtones that allow you to more easily hear that tone. Now again, we're dealing in subtlety, so that's kind of something you're going to drop this sub into your mix and mess with that, and you'll kind of hear it in your mix. If you turn it on and turn it off, it's a very subtle difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. Let me jump into a track that I made with a whole bunch of sub destroyers. So I knew once I started building these elements that I was going to have to bring some drums in somewhere. So what I did is I grabbed a bunch of drums from my Sonics 01 producer pack, and actually some that I'm working on for my Sonics 02 sample pack, which is not out yet. And I dropped them in, cut them up, and just made some quick beats. And it's a pretty short track, but why don't we listen to it? And a nice long sub drop at the end, because why not? Everything is better with a sub drop. So I would say you need to stop whatever you're doing right now, run as fast as you can to the nearest computer, go to Joey Sturgis' store and buy this thing, because it's really inexpensive, really useful, and you need it in your life. So do it.